Without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Emily Wolfteich, for our first conversation this morning with NGA, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency's Deputy Director, Deputy Chief Information Security Officer for Management and Strategy, Monica Montgomery. Give them a round of applause. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well-fed and well-caffeinated and ready to start the day. My name is Emily Wolfteich, as George Jackson said. Welcome to our very first conversation here at the Qualys Public Sector Cyber Risk Conference, Redefining Governance, AI Integration in the Public Sector. I'll be your moderator for this conversation. In this transformative era, government agencies are embracing AI in a very profound way, moving beyond sort of mere operational assistance to seamlessly integrating AI into their organizational fabric. While the potential of AI is undeniable, so are the risks. Acknowledging this challenge, the Biden administration has taken decisive action with the issuance of their executive order on the Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy AI, which is setting pioneering benchmarks for US government agencies. And as these public sector leaders forge ahead into this AI-driven future, pivotal questions are surfacing. How can they adeptly navigate this landscape of AI implementation while upholding the principles of transparency and accountability? Monica, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And if you're ready, we can go ahead.
Sure.
So following the release of the memo from OMB, how is your organization adjusting its strategies to align with these newly defined guidelines on AI?
Sure. So the agency as a whole, right? I mean, the memo starts off and basically says you have to have a chief AI officer, right? So of course we did that, but really the focus of that memo is on governance. And so that's where a lot of the efforts have been focused. However, from a cybersecurity perspective, we're taking that and looking about how we can implement and enable AI as well as use it for our own cybersecurity mission. So there's two sides to that. From the cybersecurity implementing and enabling side, we're using those things that already exist. The risk management framework is a beautiful tool to be able to do that. So that's what we're really focusing on. We are looking at it from the perspective of implementing an AI piece of that. So if I think about the NIST 853 controls that are part of the risk management framework, we've essentially created an AI overlay, and I'll put that in small, little quotes, to say if you are using AI in your systems, in your implementation, here are the things that we're really looking for. So I think that that's really one of the things that we're really focused on. The other piece of it is training, right? Getting people to be knowledgeable. I think a lot of people think they know what AI is, but the underlying coding, the implementation, the structure of that is a little bit different than just using it on the internet. And so making sure that we are bringing in SMEs, looking at it from a different perspective in that regard, and not just saying, oh, I think I know what it is. So
I think that's a really good point, that some people don't really know what AI is, right? Yeah. And that can lead to misconceptions. Mm-hmm. So to sort of mitigate that, we look for accountability and transparency. Can you talk a little bit sort of about how your agency is working with those?
Sure. So one of the things that we did in 2023 as part of Cybersecurity Awareness Month was NGA released our new cybersecurity strategy. And that strategy was unique in that it was an agency level strategy. We had cybersecurity strategies, but they were focused on IT. They were focused in the IT part of our organization. They weren't an agency-wide strategy. And that strategy is a compendium. I think of it as like a three-legged stool, right? So we have our technology strategy, we have our data strategy, and now we have our cybersecurity strategy. And all three of those things really need to be paired in order to be effective. The two pieces that I really want to highlight out of that strategy, one was data as a strategic asset. So really, if you think about what AI is, it is about data. You can't have AI without data. And so there's a really strong piece of that key pillar in our strategy that ties to AI. The second pillar that I really want to highlight is the cultural piece. And we actually called that out. It is the fifth pillar. There's 5 in our strategy. And I call it the keystone because without that pillar, none of the other ones are really going to fall into place. And that keystone was about making cybersecurity a mission and business problem. It is no longer an IT problem. And because of that, what we are doing is making cyber more transparent across the agency. We are focused on getting it into everybody's language and their responsibilities. And so I think that that's, because we're doing that, we are at the same time enabling these other things like AI and zero trust and everything else you hear about. There's a fundamental piece there of making it part of the culture.
That must be a little challenging, sort of integrating it out of the IT sector into everybody.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about sort of that challenge, but also other challenges that you're facing as you try to get everyone on board?
Oh, absolutely. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we face right now, especially with AI, is supply chain risk management. You can't go anywhere right now without it talking about that. And especially in AI, when you think about how those large language models are being developed, how they're being maintained, what to do if there's data poisoning, right? So that's a huge piece of understanding, because if you start to poison your data model, you're going to go off real quick into left field. And that's maybe not where you want to be. So the data integrity part of that. But then when you kind of take a step back and you look at it, really, this is about acquisition. And I'll be first to say it, but I don't think it's a new concept. Acquisition in the government, not exactly timely. And so because of that, that's a hard challenge when you have AI capabilities moving so fast, but our acquisition schedule doesn't allow for that. And so how do we change some of these processes, these policies, when, and it takes 3 years to change a policy in the government, how can you keep up, right? So those alone, right, are enough to keep many people employed for a long time. But we need to really kind of sit back and change that as well. A couple of other pieces that I want to hit on, because again, they're not new problems, right? Data privacy, not a new problem, but exacerbated by AI. When we push data to the edge, right? So when we talk about disconnected, intermittent, latent, at the warfighter, which is a big, big piece of what NGA tries to do, how do we maintain that data integrity at the edge? And then we got to talk about the skills gap, right? This is a new technology. It is changing every day. And so how do we maintain our SMEs knowledge? How do we get people to understand truly what it means? Those are some large challenges for sure.
Just one or two challenges,
just a few,
right?
yes.
I want to back up to data privacy
Yeah.
and hear more about that from your perspective. There's obviously so much sensitive and classified data, but we need those to train the AI models. Mm-hmm. So how are you sort of approaching that balance?
So interestingly enough, data integrity is not new to the cyber community. It is a massive piece of it when you think about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And so from a cyber perspective, not new, right? We've had things like privacy impact assessments. We've, truly embedded that in our process. The piece now is really understanding what that means. I think a large part of how we have gone about looking at data privacy up to now has been, what classification is it? Who has access to it, not necessarily about the decisions that data is making. And so as we sort of pull that thread and look at that, that's a new skill set, again, right, of how do we look at data and how do we protect it. So we have had things like encryption, that's not a new capability, but making sure that we're doing it where it needs to be. We've often, especially in the government, said, oh, well, I'm behind my firewalls, it's fine. But it's not fine anymore, right? Especially, and again, like let's pull the thread with zero trust. Assume breach, right? And so we have to make sure that if we're assuming breach, something like data privacy is even more important to really focus on. Increased monitoring, increased auditing, increased incident response. Those are all things that we are doing today, but are only going to have to get stronger as we move into, that AI world.
This may be a little out of your realm, but I thought I'd ask you anyway. What do you think is the messaging from a public trust perspective, right? Because people who don't know how their information is being used by the government to train these models or within, how would you sort of message that outwardly?
So I think it actually goes back to what you asked previously. It's about transparency, right? It is about being forthright, honest. I think when you really want to earn trust with the government, you have to be transparent when something goes wrong. And that's really hard. Nobody wants to own up to things when they go bad. But I think that is a large piece of it.
I want to back up to something that keeps coming up in this discussion, which is workforce readiness, or perhaps lack thereof at the moment. And we know that these things are really vital for the success of AI deployment. So are there training programs within your agency, or how are you hoping to sort of build up that talent within?
Yeah, so two great things that I'm really excited about. The first is NGA has started something called GREAT. This is the GeoInt, and I had to look around, GeoInt Responsible and Ethical AI Training. So this was something that our director announced about 6 months ago. We've released it out to our agency employees earlier this year. And we have the intent of pushing this out further into our communities within the NSG and ASG, so our GeoInt communities. And that training is really the first pillar of how our mission side of the house is implementing GeoInt. But that is a training capability to get our users, our GeoInt analysts, our IT experts knowledgeable about AI and how to do that responsibly and ethically. Because again, going back to that memo, right, this is the fundamental piece of how we need to implement AI. The second piece is the DoD CIO's initiative to do the Defense Cyber Workforce Framework, DCWF, which is part of 8140. And this transition from only cybersecurity people need to know how to spell cyber, right? And this 8140 says that if you're doing IT, if you're doing project management, if you're doing systems engineering, acquisition, you need to understand the fundamental pieces of cyber. And that's really, really important if you think about it, because cyber is something that needs to be truly embedded. For a long time we've talked about, adding it in at the beginning, don't bolt it on at the end, right? We've all kind of heard that scenario. But if you're talking to a program manager who doesn't understand the basic concepts of it, they're not going to program for it. They're not going to make sure that it's a priority. Again, going back to our strategy, focusing on the fact that we're trying to make a cultural change, that cyber is a business and mission problem and not an IT problem. I think 8140 is going to really help drive that forward, because we're forcing people, right, for lack of a better word, we're forcing people to understand how to implement this, even when they go, no, I'm not a cyber person, I have cyber people, right? And that's been a real struggle for a lot of companies, agencies. That's not unique to the government. And I think that making that change is going to be really beneficial.
So that's sort of collaboration within a unit. How about outside? How does that work between other agencies, particularly that have been historically perhaps a little siloed or don't talk to each other?
And so we're really leveraging, you're starting to see these standing up of working groups, interagency working groups, both across the Department of Defense as well as the intelligence community. NGA, if you're not familiar, has a foot in both camps, and so we are really engaged in that and working to collaborate. We've been sharing our lessons learned. As I mentioned, we've been very forthright in sharing our overlay of AI for 853, which has been really good within the cyber community and our risk management teams. But we've also recognized that things like our public sector, our integration with companies like Qualys, right? So how do we bring in companies? How do we bring in the knowledge where public sector has that ability to churn very, very quickly, right? How do we leverage that experience, that knowledge? Obviously, we've partnered with In-Q-Tel and understanding which companies can bring in new capabilities from that perspective. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, and internally to NGA, we've also started an AI assurance working group, which is actually marrying up both the cyber side of our house as well as our mission side of the house. Because there is such an overlap, and that is two sides to one coin. So we've started that working group internally as well, and then we're sharing that knowledge, those expertise, that output to the greater community.
So looking ahead, what's coming up? What are you excited about from a cybersecurity perspective for your agency?
I've been dreaming about this. So if you have been on the cyber side, we've often talked about finding the needle in the haystack, right? We now are trying to find the needle in a pile of needles, right? And so we need AI in cyber as much as AI is needed in other parts of our mission. And so looking at how we bring that in, I think I talked about it a little bit earlier, where I said that the increase in data integrity and incident response and auditing means that our audit logs are going up exponentially. My resource pool in my CSOC does not go up exponentially. And so I need to have AI capabilities just to be able to find that one needle in my pile of needles. And as that time goes on, that pile of needles gets larger and larger and larger. So we have to have AI in our cyber mission, not just in other parts of our mission. Looking at how we can use AI to red team internally. How would the adversary look at things, right? I can now have AI help me with that. Threat analysis, forensic, all the things that you think of when you think of incident response, right? We can leverage AI to be better, faster, stronger. And I don't know that anybody will be successful without that.
We're coming up on the end of our time, but sort of as a last question, what sort of insights from your experience or guidance would you share with both fellow public sector leaders and also people who are working to help the public sector leaders as they navigate this journey?
I think if you've picked up anything from what I've said, there are two sides to AI in cyber. The first side being, how does cyber enable AI for your agency or your public sector mission? How are you doing that? The other side is, how do you use AI to support your cyber mission, right? And so when you look at that, all of a sudden now, when you're having a conversation with somebody, know what side of that coin you're talking about, right? Because they might be coming at it from a completely different side than you. So understanding that, The communication and the collaboration, I think in this particular area, you can't do that enough. And when you start to have those conversations, the first thing that's going to come up with that is your vocabulary. Having a consistent vocabulary, dare I say ontology. I'm sorry if I've offended anybody. But understanding that that is so important to how you have that communication, understanding what side you're talking about, because it's a multifaceted problem. Don't make that assumption that everybody's coming at AI from the same side. And I think once you've started to do that, then you're going to see the momentum carry on much faster, much quicker, understanding how you can then use it and gain more efficiencies and performance.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Monica, for taking the time. I'll give her a round of applause.